Go up and then want to check. What are you doing? So now come back. Hello everyone. Hello. So we'll start shortly, but there's a QR code up here, and if you enter, well, if you do the survey, you have a chance to win a mug. And this time around, like, it's another mug actually, so please like do the survey. We'll start in about 2 minutes. No, I can't use this. Yeah, same thing. Okay, so we're going to start. So hello everyone, welcome to the second public talk of the year. My name is Steven. Just before we officially begin, oh, so here's just a little bit of like the code of conduct about our events. So we want this to feel like a welcome space for everyone. So if you're feeling uncomfortable by any means, please let me know, or the volunteer that you see when you're coming from the door and stuff. And if you have any more questions or some topics that you want to suggest for the public talk, please let us know as well. There should be email somewhere there, but anyway. Okay. Yeah, so there's an email. If you have any suggestion for the talk, let us know. So we will begin. So we want to welcome Cornelia Höhr, who is an associate professor at the University of Victoria and TRIUMF as well. TRIUMF is the Canada's National Particle Accelerator Center in Vancouver. And today she will talk about how nuclear physics can help us in the fight against cancer. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Can you give me the back? Okay. Who cannot give me? Who can give me that? Before I get into it, who has a background in the physical sciences and biology or chemistry? Who has a background in the arts or in economy? All right, okay, perfect. Okay, so my name, as Stephen already said, is Connie. My official name is Cornelia. Nobody calls me Cornelia. Well, except my mom, which was really angry with me, or immigration officials. So I'm Connie. I'm originally from Germany, as you probably hear from my accent. I have been at TRIUMF for 20 years this year, so quite a while. And my background is experimental physics, but over the years I have split into more of the medical applications. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about why nuclear physics is actually really useful to fight cancer. And I'm going to try to show that a little bit by telling you about the radiotherapy program at TRIUMF. But first of all, TRIUMF is in Vancouver. It's a beautiful city. It's one of these nice cities that's at the ocean and the mountains. So if you really want to, if you're not afraid of cold water, you can swim in the morning and you can ski in the afternoon. So it's quite nice. If you come to TRIUMF, we are doing public tours. So give me an email or just come by and we can show you around. And TRIUMF itself is Canada's National Center of Accelerators. So that's what we are doing. Everything that we do starts with accelerators. And TRIUMF itself is an acronym, or it started out as an acronym. It was founded by the 3 local universities close to Vancouver, University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser University, and also University of Victoria in Quebec. And they got together in the 60s, and they wanted to have infrastructure, very large-scale infrastructure, which is too big for any single university. So they got together, and that's how TRIUMF was founded. And then by the first board meeting, already the 4th university joined, which was the University of Alberta, but then the name didn't work anymore. So we kept the name TRIUMF, but now it's not an acronym anymore, it's just a name. And today we have 21 member universities, and they really span from the East Coast to the West Coast. And of course, McGill is one of our very active member university in our program. So at TRIUMF, what we know is we know how to build accelerators. Everything ends with accelerators. So we know how to build very large scale accelerators. We know how to operate them. We know how to build detectors and do targets. And in general, we know about the interactions with particles. We actually are housing the world's largest cyclotron. We even have a plaque of the Guinness Book of Records, and we're housing the world's largest cyclotron. And the International Engineering Association has milestones of very large engineering achievements. For example, they list the first payload from Europe to North America, so you can send telegrams they're actually listing our cyclotron in there as well. When Pierre Trudeau was prime minister, he came out to TRIUMF at one point, and he famously said, "I do not know what a cyclotron does, but I'm sure proud that Canada has one." And then the younger Trudeau came to TRIUMF as well for some funding information, and I guess he went up on it because he declared, "I now know what a cyclotron does, and it's good that we have one." So, all right, so that's TRIUMF, and it's really meant to do fundamental physics, nuclear physics, particle physics. We are studying a lot of the interactions when it has particles, hitting particles, see what happens, like tiny particles, creating particles, bouncing off particles, so at a really microcosmos. And they have then very important implications, a very large scale for how the universe has been formed, how stars are born, how stars are dying. And in between, we are actually using all this expertise and technology for medicine. So when you look on our map, all of these sites with the blue circle is where we're using one of these accelerators for medical application. And we in the life science division at TRIUMF, we are proud to say that we're using all of our accelerators for one application or not. All right, so the talk that I want to give you is most of the applications that we do is about cancer, oncology. So I'm going to talk about that really quick. And I'm going to introduce some important parameters that are then helping us to understand how to do it. That's dose and linear energy transfer. Then I'm going to jump into external beam therapies, where you take an accelerator, you create a beam and you're aiming it at a patient to treat the cancer. And then something is called flash that you do with external beam. Then I'm going to end with targeted alpha therapy, where you're actually taking the radioactivity and you're not bringing it with an external beam, you're actually injecting them, putting them directly into the tumor. All right, let's start. So if you do have cancer, just some numbers. We are in a developed country. We are incredibly fortunate that we are living quite long. And that means that cancer affects pretty much all of us. Every second person in this room will have cancer in their lifetime, and every fourth person in this room will die. So it's probably safe to say that cancer really affects everybody, either directly or indirectly with the life. So 25 is the probability to die of cancer. About 50% of the cancer patients can be cured. About 45% of cancer patients do receive some sort of radioactivity, some radiation, either alone or in combination with surgery or chemotherapy. 65 are diagnosed with a localized tumor. So it's really just a primary tumor somewhere and it hasn't spread. And 80% of radiotherapy is done with photons, so with light particles. Now, photons are normally generated with little small accelerator. I'm going to show you a photo otherwise. It's about probably you can do like 3 by 4 by 3 meters. All the major local hospitals probably have half a dozen of those or a dozen in the basement. So it's really, really common to be treated with flames. Okay, so on this plot here, I'm showing you on the top row for men and on the bottom row for women, cancer occurrence and then the cancer mortality. So if you look at the top left, you can see that prostate cancer is a very common cancer for men. But the mortality is only 10%. So why is there this discrepancy? So some of course has to do with that we have quite advanced and rigorous screening programs for prostate cancer. So it's often discovered really early. But although prostate cancer is a very serious disease, we have a lot of treatment that work really well. Lung cancer, on the other hand, is 15%, and the mortality is 31%. Again, we don't have quite as advanced screening programs for lung cancer, so it's typically discovered later, but it's also a very, very aggressive cancer, and unfortunately, a lot of patients die of lung cancer. And it's the same for women with breast cancer. So when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's very important to figure out, of course, what is the cancer, where is it, which type of cancer is it just a primary tumor, how big is it, has it spread, what is the overall condition of the patient, what is the age, what's the health. You take that all into account and you come up with the treatment plan. And we want to have this as personalized as we possibly can, so we're not wasting time and frankly resources. We really want to have the best treatment for that case. Okay, so one of the things, the most important thing that we do in cancer research has to do with something that's called the therapeutic index or the therapeutic window. And if you're looking on this plot, on the x-axis is the dose, which basically just means how much destruction are you doing in the patient. And the left-hand curve, where it says tumor control, that is the curve that describes how well can we treat the cancer, how well can we kill the cancer cells. And the right side of the curve is the normal tissue composition. Whenever you go in to do anything for cancer, you will always do some damage to healthy tissue. It's pretty much unavoidable. But what we want to do is have to minimize that. So in this case, for example, if you're, for example, thriving to have a tumor control of 80%, which is pretty good. So 80% probability that the tumor will shrink and go away or be cut out, whatever it is. In this patient would mean that we have a normal tissue complication of almost 60%. That is pretty low. And that would mean that you're doing some real damage to make the patient incredibly uncomfortable or cause secondary cancer down the road. So you wouldn't do that. What you want to do is choose the treatment where the therapeutic index is wider. So in this case, you still have a tumor control of 80%, but now you have a tissue complication of 20%. I think we can live with that. So everything we do in cancer research is try to separate these two lines as best as we can. We want to widen the therapeutic index or the therapeutic window. Now, if you do have cancer, you diagnose cancer, there are three main ways, and there's the fourth one very recently that is gaining a lot of ground that you can do. You can cut the tumor out, and oncologists love it, because you just go out and you cut it out, and then you're done with it. But you can't always do that. It's not always localized, or sometimes it's very close to really complicated organs you can't do it. So you can cut it out. You can do chemotherapy, that is some drugs that attack really fast dividing cells. And that is why when you have chemotherapy, you often lose your hair, you sometimes lose your fingernails, because those are cells that are dividing really, really fast as well. So that really works well if the cancer is fast growing and is spread all around the body, so you can't get it stuck in the other way. But not every cancer is actually that, right? Or you can use radiation. Now you can kill anything and everything with radiation. But again, you have to be careful how you're doing it. And you can do this either with an external beam, as I said, where you're aiming your beam onto the patient, or you can insert the radioactivity directly into the tumor around, or you can inject it into your bloodstream and have it then transported to the tumor. And then there's also immunotherapy, where we basically use the patient's immune system to attack the cancer, which has been shown to be really always successful. So that's really. Those are the options that you have when you have cancer. So now, again, as I said, what we want to do is to control the tumor, shrink the tumor as best as we can by not causing too many side effects or cause secondary cancer down the road. Now, one of the really, really good ways to kill a cancer cell or any cell is to destroy DNA. So your cell has a nucleus, and in the nucleus there's a double helix strand of DNA, which has all the information of the cell in it. And then the cell goes through its life cycle. At some point, it goes into the phase where it divides into mitosis. And then it really needs the DNA to make sure it knows how to do that. If the DNA is damaged, it can't do it and very often will die. Now, cells have figured out very well if there is one break in the double helix, how to repair, including cancer cells. So cells are really good at that. So to really do this effectively, you have to do 2 breaks in that DNA. And then it's very high probability that the cell will not survive. So what we want to do is double strand breaks of the DNA. And nature, by the way, is quite kind to us, nature or God, in the sense that in many parts of our bodies, the tumor is actually more sensitive to radiation than the healthy tissue. So it will die faster than the healthy tissue. Keep that in mind, for example. Not in our case, especially. Okay, again, you want to do that for the cancer and not for the healthy cells as much as you can. Okay, so what do we have actually available to treat? What are the radioactive particles that we can do that? On the top here, I have an alpha particle. You can also use a proton or a heavy ion, like a carbon ion. So these are quite heavy. So if an alpha particle goes into any matter, including human tissue, it will go pretty straight. And all these circles that you see are ionization events. So the particle will go in and it will ionize the atoms, the molecule, the one that's in there, and that's how the damage is done. That's why it's often called ionization. And then you have beta particles, electrons, so they go in, they scatter quite a bit more, and they don't have a defined range. But I forgot to say about the alpha particles called protons, they go in a defined range that is defined by its initial energy, and then they will stop. So you can imagine you have a proton, which is about 2,000 times heavier than the electrons that it mainly interacts with, and we're putting it down a bowling alley, and the pins are the electrons that just fly away, and then the bowling ball stops. Beta particles have the same mass of the electrons that it mainly interacts with, so they kind of scatter a little bit more. And then gammas, photons, they scatter even more and have also no defined range and very long tail. We also can use neutrons, although they're not very often used. They do a little bit of indirect damage by producing actual ions. So those are the particles that we can use for radiation, for ionizing radiation. Now, what is actually being described? So with your ionic clinic, what is described is a particular particle, for example, a gamma ray or a photon. And then what is described is the absorbed dose. And bear with me, so an absorbed dose is the energy that's absorbed in the unit volume of medium, tissue, water, divided by the mass. Basically, you're putting energy into a small cube of a defined size. And the unit for that is joule per kilogram. Joule is the unit for energy in kilogram per mass, and we call this gray. So we're describing gray, like 5 gray, 30 gray to the 2. So that's what's being described. And we know the doses in radiotherapy range from 2 to about 60 grays, and we're not giving them just one shot, because we need to make sure that the healthy tissue can recover. So we need to be kind to the healthy tissues, and we're going to spread it out over 5 to 6 weeks. That's how normal radiotherapy works. And the dose is a surrogate for the dose kill. After a certain threshold, if you give more dose, or to some people there is no threshold, if you give more dose, you will kill more cells. Okay, so the next slide, you have to take a little bit tongue in cheek. I think that's the expression. So it's not entirely serious. So don't quote me on that too much. Okay, what's the lethal dose? So in radiation protection, from data that go back to experiments that were done on nuclear weapons testing, on Hiroshima survivor, and then also Chernobyl survivor, we know that the lethal dose is 5 gray to the whole body. So that is a lethal dose. If you get that, you will cross the lethal dose. So if you're assuming it's a man of good size, 70 kilograms, That means the absorbed energy is 350 joules. Any espresso lovers in the audience? Okay. So if you have your morning espresso and you love to drink it really, really hot, so at 60+ degrees, and you calculate it out like a small cup, that is actually 351 joules. And we all know that you're not going to die from alcohol. So what I want to say with that is that you have to really consider energy is an energy. What are the particles? How are you giving it? Where are you giving it? And this is what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to introduce you to is the concept of linear energy transfer, or LNT. Basically, what that is the density of these ionization. So if one of these particles goes to tissue, on the top you see photons that are often used in radiation therapy, or electrons. They are doing an ionization event ever so often. They miss the DNA entirely. So they're not actually damaging the DNA entirely. But we said it's really a good way to kill cancer cells if you're destroying the tumor. So why does that still work? Well, it works because the human body, human tissue is mainly water. We have a lot of water in our cells and all of that. And these ionization events, they are probably ionizing the oxygen. And then you have free radicals. And I'm sure you all heard about the damage of free radicals in your food from sunlight. Those free radicals are actually going to attack the DNA and damage. So in many cases, these low energy particles are just fine because we have the water around and you can do the damage to the DNA in the cell. But ever so often you have a very aggressive cancer, a radiation-resistant cancer. It doesn't react that way, especially if it's an older, it has grown already for a while and has a certain size. Then it's normally hypoxic. It's devoid of oxygen, and then you can't do this squeezing again. In that instance, you need particles that have a really high energy, where your density of ionization events is really high, so you can hit the DNA direct. And these particles are protons, ions, and neutrons, and that's then the direct damage. Okay, so that has fundamental implications how we think about it. One other concept that is important and is related to this is called RBE, relative biological effectiveness, because we have treated with X-rays for decades and decades and decades. That's our standard. So we say it's 1. So the orange curve here on this typical survival plot. So on the bottom, you have the dose, the destruction. And on the y-axis, you have the survival fraction. So at the beginning, all of your cells have survived. And then if you give more and more dose, they die off. So X-rays, we set to 1, the RBE, and then you can see that protons are about 2 times more effective. And heavier ions are up to 20 times more effective because you're doing the damage then. And the other concept is called oxygen enhancement ratio. So I told you that we can use X-rays if oxygen is around, because then you do your DNA destruction event. So here you see again the survival fraction plot with the absorbed dose. Hypoxic means there is no oxygen around. Aerated means it's well aerated with air, so there's lots of oxygen around. You see, when it's aerated for photons, it dies off a lot faster because you can do your secondary damage, but there's no oxygen around. So for X-rays, you can enhance your treatment if you get oxygen into the tumor by a factor of 4. But for ions, it doesn't matter because most of the damage is done directly. This is often, sometimes when you have radiation therapy, you might get a drug that helps drive your oxygen into your tissue. You know it. Okay, so let's have a look how that actually works. So here we have an older photo of one of these small accelerators that are sitting in the hospitals. It's an electron accelerator, so we accelerate electrons, and then the electrons hit a target, a tungsten target, and get converted into high energy photons, into X-rays, that are then directed onto a patient who is comfortable. Sort of comfortably living on lying on the couch. You can't be too comfortable, because if you're too comfortable, then you're moving around. So you really need the fix. So that's how that works. Here you see a typical depth dose. So on the bottom, you have the depth in human tissue. Then on the right, you have the dose, which we now know as a surrogate of the cell kill. So you can see there's a little bit of a sparing effect. It's building up. Then we have a peak where most of the destruction is being done, and then we have a very, very long tail. These machines are quite cost effective because they have been around for such a long time. We have a lot of techniques how to make these treatments safe. So one of these machines is in the order of 1.5 millions, which might sound like a lot, but in healthcare, this is actually cheap. And they don't need that much space as you can see. And you can see that you would probably place your tool kind of in the middle. So most of the destruction is actually happening before you reach the tumor, but that's okay. Because we learned that we're not doing it all in one shot. So we would come one day from one side, hit a tumor and a healthy tissue on this side. The next day we would come from this side, hit a tumor again, but hit different healthy tissue. This helps the healthy tissue recover between refractions. We're always hitting the tumor, but we spread the damage to the healthy tissue. We also have other things like vectors and accelerators. So we would have done this for a long time, and we know how to. But these particles are low LET. We also can use electrons. Most electrons come from these accelerators, so they're actually quite low in energy. So they're not going very deep into tissue. They're just going maybe a centimeter or so into tissue. There are efforts to make higher energy electron accelerators for this effort, but right now in the clinic it's very low. So it's limited to skin cancer or maybe really shallow cancer like breast cancer as a booster. And that's how the distribution would look. And again, there are low LET. And then we have the proton. And this looks as close to ideal as you can imagine. So you're coming in and you're doing a little bit of damage until you get into this peak. It's called the Bragg peak, and this is where you do about 8% of the destruction. So all you have to do is dial in the energy of your protons so at the right depth. And then you do a little bit of destruction before, main destruction in tumor, and nothing. So that's why this is so powerful. The downside is that you need a really high energy accelerator. I told you that the TRIUMF cyclotron is the world's largest cyclotron. So we accelerate protons to 500 million electron volts. We put it at the speed of light. To do this on a clinical basis, you need 230 million electron volts. So about half. So these are large size of accelerators, and they're expensive. 10 years ago, they were incredibly expensive. You needed about $100 million to kind of put one of these things in. There have been quite some technical development with companies, maybe also competition. So by now you can get one of these facilities maybe for 50 million, some are even cheaper. So they are coming down in price, but they're significantly more expensive than the radiation therapy. And I also told you that in many cases, when the tumor is susceptible to low LET particles, we don't believe. So there are many cases where protons are just fine. But there are some cases where protons or heavy ions might be a better way to go. Now, Robert Wilson is often credited to be the father of proton therapy. The Bragg peak have been known quite wide. Hans Bethe actually wrote the equations for it in the 30s. And then Robert Wilson shortly after figured out that this might be ideal for proton therapy, for cancer therapy. He did this during the Second World War because he worked at one of the DoD labs. He couldn't publish anything. But right after the Second World War, he then published. He then went on to be director of Formula, where proton therapy was being used. All right, so in summary, if we look at all these detectors again, so photons you can overlay with the tumor. With photons, you have tails, and electrons clinically are really, really short range. So how does that look actually in a real patient? So here we have a plot looking from the top of a patient, and we're looking into the brain, and you see on the top the two eyes and the nose. And in the white circle is where the tumor is in the brain. Now, I told you that we are lucky in the sense that the cancer is often dying faster than other tissue. Brain tissue is one of the examples. Brain tissue is incredibly sensitive. And it's actually incredibly tricky to treat because the healthy tissue is often more sensitive than the cancer. But this one is a pretty bad one. So if we would do a treatment plan with X-rays, it probably would come from the bottom right. And in the red is most of the dose or the cell kill. So you can see that most of the destruction actually happens before you even reach the tumor. And then you have this long tail, and you also got to hit the eye, which is another one of these organs that cannot probably be reached. Or you could do it with photons, where you of course see some destruction, but it's kind of confined to your tumor, and then it's nothing. So brain cancer, not all, but some cases might benefit to use protons or heavy ions. Okay, so you can use X-rays or protons, yeah.
Yeah, sorry for the X-rays. Why is it coming from the back instead of the front? Is it because the damage that would potentially, what's situated in the back of the skull is less important than in the front and the
So that is at the discretion of the oncologist who does the treatment. But typically in these cases, they try to keep your vision in your eye. Because if you lose vision in one eye, it really, really affects your life quality. So that's why they're normally trying to do that. But it's a really good question. Okay, the choice between X-rays and photons. And this is, I'm going to introduce you to my dad. So my dad, living in Germany, grew up in the Black Forest with my mom, with my brother. He was a retired Lutheran minister. Not entirely sure how I ended up in physics, but actually a lot of my colleagues have come out of church backgrounds. So he had prostate cancer. And one of the first treatment options that they gave him was radiation therapy. And because he lived in Heidelberg in Germany, there is a proton therapy center. He had the choice between X-rays and photons. And the doctors looked at it, they looked at the size, they looked if it has spread, they looked at the markers, the DNA, and they decided it wouldn't matter. And he and I discussed it. And I said, go with what the doctors recommend. So he went with traditional radiotherapy because it's an easier treatment than proton therapy. Because with proton therapy, because it's so sharp, you have to be situated very tight than the traditional radiotherapy. So it's more common. That's what he did. And it worked really well for 7 years. He had his treatments for 5 weeks, so and that was good. Okay. And I'm saying that because I keep saying proton therapy is great, but I also wanted to tell you that you don't need it in every case. And I actually recommend it to my father. So we really don't need it for every case. At TRIUMF, we actually had Canada's only proton therapy facility. It was a small beamline coming off the main cyclotron. We started clinical treatment in 1995. That makes us one of the older proton therapy facilities. And we stopped clinical treatment in 2019. And that is mainly because our infrastructure, our equipment age needed replacement. And then our local cancer agency, BC Cancer Agency, decided that they don't want to put the investment into the facility, they rather take these patients and send them to the US, because there are several facilities. And the reason for that is that we were the world's smallest therapy facility. I had the pleasure to be manager of it for 10 years. We only had 10 patients a year. 10 patients a year, a lot of people went into that program. We only treated ocular melanoma, so tumor in the eye. It's a very, very good treatment, actually. So the patient is actually sitting for this treatment, and you have the beam that go into the eye. And if you look at these numbers, the local tumor control rate, that's the left-hand side of the curve, was 91%. 91%. It's really, really good. And the metastatic survival rate is 82%. Sometimes we treated patients that already had a metastasis somewhere that we couldn't see because it was too small. So then they did pass away from the metastasis. But it's a really, really good treatment. Okay, so Canada has no phototherapy facility at the moment. It doesn't mean that we don't treat patients. So we have several of the doctors in Vancouver, in Montreal, in Quebec, they actually have good connections with the US, and they do routinely send patients with eye tumors or brain tumors and prostate tumors into the US for treatment. I do believe that at some point we will have a phototherapy center again because this is an economics question. When we send patients into the US, as a rule of thumb, they charge out of country patients about double what they charge US patients, which makes sense. If you're sending more and more patients at some point, it will make sense that we have our own phototherapy facility, and then not just for eyes, but also for other indications. There have been plans in Toronto, and there have been plans in Montreal. None of them have come to fruition yet, but I do believe one of them will. Just makes sense because this is where the bulk of the Canadian population lives. There is a plan right now to build one in Edmonton, and while I do wish that it will really work, I kind of question the location a little bit because Edmonton isn't exactly highly populated. But okay, so we don't have one at the moment. And just as a side note, if you remember, TRIUMF stands for Tri-University Mason Facility. Mason are subatomic particles, and one of these is a pion. Now, pion is one of these tiny particles that we can make. We are factory for them. So we are one of 3 sites in the world that actually use these pions to treat cancer in a clinical trial. Pions have, like photons and heavy ions, this gravity that you can overlay with the tumor. And then it gets really exciting for physicists when pions slow down. At the very end, they have almost no energy left. They are captured by the nucleus and they explode like little stars. So you have all these particles with high LET, which are really, really damaging. So the physicists thought this is awesome. We're going to use these pions to treat cancer. We did this and 2 other sites, and we did it at TRIUMF for prostate cancer and for brain cancer, glioblastoma. It's an incredibly aggressive cancer. And there is a reason why you probably have never heard of this treatment. If you look at this graph, it's again one of the survival plots here in time. So we have in the solid line the pion therapy, in the dotted line the typical photon therapy. And about half a year in, people got really excited because it really looked like people were surviving beta. You can see how aggressive this cancer is. But then we went out to 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and there just was no difference. So we and the other 2 sides stopped this. So this is where the physics looks promising, and then biology kind of messes up. Okay, so that was pion therapy. All right, and I told you that we can also use heavy ions, for example, carbon. And in this plot, you have the dose on the y-axis and then the depth on the x-axis, like the depth curve that we saw already. In green, it's for protons, if you use carbon lines, because they're heavier, for the same destruction coming in, you actually can give more destruction to the tumor. If you're thinking about the two curves, therapeutic index, can move your left line even further. So that looks really good. It has a downside in that a carbon ion that goes to any material can actually break up, can fragment, and then you have lighter particles, and that's why you have this tail. So they don't stop. And this is used worldwide in some facilities, including in Heidelberg, a facility that I'm very familiar with. It's really cleverly called HIT, Facility Heidelberg Ionenstrahl Therapy Center. And you can clearly see that German is not that complicated, because I'm sure you can translate that. That's the Heidelberg Ion Beam Therapy Center. So they have a synchrotron, another type of accelerator with two ion sources, one for protons and one for carbon ions. And then they have two fixed beam lines where people align, and then they have a gantry where the beam can really curve around to go from whichever angle you need. It's really comfortable validation. And what they can do with that is then really personalize their treatment. If you look at this plot, just look at the bottom two lines. You have carbon ions and protons in depth. And you can see protons are heavy, but not as heavy as the carbon ions, so they spread more. While carbon ions, they keep more together, but they have to tail. So if for your treatment line it's more important that your beam stays nice and coordinated, you're going to use carbon ions. It's more important that you're not hitting anything behind the tumor, you're going to do protons. So they can really dial in for a specific treatment what you're learning. So how exciting is this? Well, proton therapy and carbon therapy is not that widespread, but it is up and coming. We used to have quite a few in the US, about 48 centers. Europe has quite a few. There was one in South Africa, and they're building one again, so they are building it. And then there's a very large concentration in Japan. They just really believe in anything radiation, although since Fukushima passed. But they still have very, very big nuclear medicine and radiation therapy programs. Okay. So I talked about external beam radiation therapy, and now I want to tell you about something that's called flash. So we talked about that you're giving the treatment over the course of 5 to 6 weeks, always hitting the tumor, but trying to keep the healthy tissue alive and healthy as much as you can. And one of the reasons also why you're doing it is you want to hit the cancer cells hard. And there is a cell cycle that the cells go through. And at the end of the cycle is when they divide. And this is when they are most sensitive to radiation. So if you're spreading it out over 4 to 5 weeks, you can be sure that you're going to hit that at some point in the next. Okay, typically you give doses in the range of 0.03 gray a second. Gray was the uniform dose. Okay. Now, in the middle of the last century, some researchers were actually questioning this. Why are we doing this? Why are we not giving the dose in one shot? And they actually did an experiment where they did this. They had a very large effective accelerator where they did this, and they saw very interesting things. They saw that you can protect healthy cells. They published it, and then because it was so exciting, and nobody could build these accelerators for a clinical operation, unfortunately, that vanished into the libraries and was sort of forgotten. And then, just in the last 5 years or 10 years or so, people in Geneva got this out and thought, oh, this is interesting. We're going to look at. So here they applied these doses with the conventional dose rate, it was 0.03 grays per second. This is pig skin, the pig rosamin. Pig skin has an incredibly similar behavior to human skin, so it's often used as a stand-in. And you can see the skin is burned. You basically have radiation burns. Now, if you're doing the same thing really fast, with a dose rate of over 40 grays per second, you don't have any burns. There's a little bit of discoloration, but there are no burns. So indeed, they found that these really high dose rates protect the healthy tissue. Now, it's not quite clear why. There are many theories there, and people across the world are actively and furiously trying to figure out why. Most of these experiments are done with electrons, but we know that they're actually not that relevant for it. It's done with electrons because a lot of these accelerators are in the clinic, and they are built for the conventional dose rates. You can't get the high dose rates. But if you're pulling the conversion target, then you can do the experiments with the electrons. And I need to warn you, the next slide has some issue. So if you're squirmish, or if you want to have a really nice dinner afterwards, maybe don't look. This is actually being used now for clinical trials for patients. This is a gentleman in Geneva with recurring skin cancer that they finally then treated with electrons. And you remember, electrons don't go very deep, but it can be used for skin. And it looked incredibly promising. So there are clinical trials around the world now to kind of figure out how to do that. But electrons aren't the right thing. We need to do it with maybe other particles. In Vancouver, here you see my colleague, Anthony. He's a radiation biologist. He is using these small accelerators in the clinic to do electron experiments, and he does see the flash effect. So indeed, it's a real thing. And at TRIUMF, because we can build accelerators, we can actually do a photon flash. We have one of these electron accelerators. It's not the smallest, it's actually quite large, but it has enough power, enough flux, and we build a converter that we can make photon flash experiments. So what we did, we upgraded one of these beam dumps. Here we have the lead shielding, and in there, there's a little elevator. So we can lower whatever we want to irradiate down out of the beam, and then we can tune the beam, set the beam up, and then we can bring the specimen, and I'm saying this because it's animals, into the beam we can irradiate. This is not really meant for it. Why did we do this? This is a very large experimental part. Just to close it up takes 40 minutes. So you cannot set up the beam and then go in and place something for hours. We have to do it from now. So we did these experiments where we then irradiated biological models, which is a political correct way to say mice. And in this plot is a lot of information that basically what you're seeing on the dark green and the dark blue, that there is a difference between flash and conventional. Flash mice gained more weight, which normally means they're healthier and happier. And on the right-hand side, you can also see that the ones that have been irradiated with flash survive. So we indeed have indication that photon flash works as well. And then a lot of photon therapy facilities, including our facility, have upgraded the facilities to do photon flash. Now we closed our facility for clinical operation, but the facility is still there and we're doing a lot of research. And here during the pandemic, as you can see, with us all wearing a mask, we upgraded, and this graph just shows you that indeed we can deliver more than 40 grays per second. And we have started doing a lot of detector testing and cell cells. Here you see preliminary data where we irradiate these cells. And you can see in this survival curve, I think you're quite familiar with survival curves by now. So the survival against the dose. If we're just doing it with conventional protons in red, if we're doing it with photon flash, we indeed see that the cells are surviving. Having said all that, so I hope that a lot of this research will help to get this into the clinic, because it potentially widens the therapeutic index. But there's another reason why I really like the idea of photon flash. I mean, it's a lot more difficult to do because you have to get it right with just one shot. But think about Canada. Canada is a very vast country with a lot of remote locations up north. Think about you're living somewhere up north and you have cancer and you need to go for radiotherapy. You will have to go to a big city for 2 months. And because you will not feel very good, you probably will have somebody with you. So all of a sudden you have 2 people from a family, from a community that's gone. It's incredibly disruptive, especially for the small. If we can get us into the clinic, you can shorten this to 3 days or a week instead of 2 months. So I think, especially for a country like Canada, would be quite good. Yes.
Could I just ask, I'm totally uninformed about this. You had to diagram here, seems to show a straight line
Yeah.
with many specific examples of patients on that line, is that
Oh,
right?
I know those are cells, yeast cells.
So the fact that they're in a straight line is purely the result of the diagram, just represent actual. I was finding it suspicious that there seemed to be such a perfect symmetry between the cases, but my stupidity, because I was mistaking the filled-in circles for actual cases.
Yeah, so no, they're not patients. So these are experiments that we did with cells. So we expose them to the radiation, and then we take them and take them back into the biology lab. We put them onto patient dishes, and we let them grow for a month or so, and then we count how many have actually survived. And then that number is what's plotted here for the different doses that we have.
So I'm still not sure if I'm understanding. Are those filled circles along
Yeah.
that straight line examples of real life experiments?
Yeah, that's.
So it's, okay, so there really is that symmetry
There
because
is that symmetry.
that's remarkable.
I know, this is actually quite a close to textbook. But you see it's not a perfect line, there are
That's
errors,
what I was wondering.
but yes, yeah.
Why is it thinking desiccated these cells? That's less oxygen.
Incredibly good question. So we chose yield cells where we took the oxygen out, because one of the explanations for the flash effect is the oxygen. So one of the hand-wavy explanation for the flash effect is, so remember the flash effect makes the healthy tissue die less, but the cancer dies the same. So the idea is, because we are going in with our radiation so fast, in under a second, we are using up all the oxygen, and then the normal pathways for the oxygen to come back in are too slow. So we're making our healthy tissue artificially hypoxic. So I wanted to figure out if that is really the case. So that's why we use desiccated yeast cell. Okay, now I'm getting very excited. This should not happen because there is no oxygen. But we still see an effect, and we don't know yet why. Stay tuned. We hope to figure it out. Very good question. Okay, so that was flash therapy. Okay. Sometimes you have a patient who looks like that. The cancer isn't in one spot or 2 spots. It's spread over the whole body. There is no way you can take a beam from the outside and cover it, because you would have to cover the whole patient. And then you're putting like 5 gray into the whole body, and we know that that's really good fun. So a patient like this is your prostate cancer patient out of Heidelberg in Germany, who had undergone the typical treatment for prostate cancer, and the normal medicine didn't know what to do anymore. So he qualified in Germany for a clinical trial. By the way, this image is a PET image, prostate tomography image. So what you're doing is you have a protein that wants to go to the cancer cells, that attaches to the cancer cells, and you're putting an imaging isotope onto it, in this case, Gallium-68, and then you inject it, and it does its thing, and it attaches to the tumor, and then it decays. And it decays by sending out photons that you can scan in an image. That's how you get this image. Now imagine you take that protein that wants to go to the cancer, and instead of putting an imaging isotope on it, you're putting an isotope on that decays by sending out alpha particles. And we now know alpha particles have high LET, incredibly lethal cancer cells or any cells. And that's what they did. They took that protein, PSMA, and attached actinium-225, which sends out 4 alpha particles. So a lot of LET are high LET particles. And this is how the patient goes after just 3 of these injections. And basically was cured and lived on for 7 more years. And then the literature says he died of unrelated causes. Because we don't quite know what that is and what that means, but he did go on for several years. So this caused quite a stir in the community. And here I'm going to jump back to my dad. My dad, living in Heidelberg, had his radiation therapy. It worked pretty well. At some point, the cancer came back, and then he normally then prescribed hormone therapy. The hormones basically cut off all testosterone, because prostate cancer normally wants testosterone from growing. So you're cutting off artificially the testosterone. And that worked really well for years. So he went from one of these hormone therapy drugs to the next one. But at some point, it didn't work anymore. So he then had the PSMA treatment. And it worked beautifully. So this is my dad. He had a really large tumor in his head, the kind of really large. You can see some also in the chest area and so on. And he was actually then had no issues anymore. Unfortunately, that didn't last as long as in the literature, but they did give him 1 more year. So he did live probably 1 additional year because of that. This is where I'm having trouble talking. One of the things that you have to also see is it's not just the tumors that are lighting up, it's also the saliva glands. So what this treatment does, at least back then, kill the tumor and kills the cells in your mouth that produces the saliva. So you have chronic severe dry mouth. Now that doesn't sound so horrible. I mean, you just have a little bit of water while you're eating, but it's actually quite limiting. And I know that because I cooked for my dad. Everything that I cooked had to be limited. I tried to get as many calories into them as I possibly could, like butter, cream, you name it. And I wanted to get protein and so everything you make liquid enough that you can swallow it, but then the volume goes up. So it's kind of like make it not liquid, but then you can swallow it and make it liquid, then you would eat that much. It was not nice. And it really limited the slide quality because my dad did not eat it. So one of the research that is going on right now is figuring out how to make this protein so it goes to the tumor, but not to the saliva gland. Another thing that you should know is that actinium-225 is a beautiful medical isotope, but there isn't that much around. Most of it is from nuclear weapons testing, the base. There is just not that much around, you can't get it. It turns out that having the world's largest cyclotron is the perfect machine to make this isotope. So we can try and actually make this isotope quite a lot of abundance. So when we radiate our targets, we're making hundreds of isotopes, including the actinium-225. In a PhD project, we figured out how to do the irradiation, we designed it, the target, the irradiation conditions, how we clean it up. And here on the right-hand side, you can see our first batch that we will give to our commercial partners. And we have now made this isotope for the company BWXT Medical, which is sitting on the TRIUMF campus. And they are selling it, for example, to really pharmaceutical companies, for example, Bayer, which are distributing it for clinical trials. And we are also in-house are actively working to design these proteins so they are not destroying the saliva glands. And because prostate cancer only affects half of the population, also how to use it for other cancer sites, brain cancer, breast cancer, and okay, on that cheery note, I hope I have convinced you that nuclear physics actually is really useful for cancer therapies. There is still a lot of work to be done, but I think you're doing pretty good. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Okay, so now will just be questions. So just raise your hand and you can do whoever.
You were already really, really good questions. Any more? Yes.
What are those flash even, what's your like own theory on why it was best with keeping healthy cells together?
I did like the theory with the oxygen. It made a lot of sense to me. And you have to remember, I'm a physicist and I'm a biologist. I really have to like when I talk to radiation biologists that come up with really, really cool ideas about other parts of the cells or other mechanisms. But then, because there's so many experiments out there right now, there's always an experiment that supports it, and then an experiment that invalidates it. So we really have to know. And I'm strongly passionate, convinced about it. We need to figure out what it is so we can maximize it. Because for us to really get it into the clinic and take the risk of doing it in such a fast treatment, we have to maximize.
But this is, I know we talked a lot about cancer, but does it also work on like the non-tumors as well?
Yeah, it works with benign tumors as well. It normally, unless the benign tumor is really pushing on something that really causes a lot of issues, you wouldn't use it. Because of the risk and the healthy tissue and the side effects and potential secondary cancer number. But it can be used, it can also be used on viruses or any other ones. So that is all so it's mainly used for cancer, but there's a lot of research for other indications.
That isotope that you guys have produced in the cyclotron, have you guys made any attempts to try and commercialize that process?
So yeah, so we have a license, our target technology, and how to also we know how to irradiate it, and then we take the target and we also develop a technique to clean it up because it's a chunk of metal with hundreds of isotopes in it, and we want to just one ice. We develop a technique for that. We have licensed that to the company WST. There isn't that much commercially, but no, we are, yeah. By the time you do all because we license it to them, but we also operate the machine for that. By the time you extract all the costs, there's a little bit of profit that can then reinvest into other research, but we're not as much better. Yeah.
You go from energy techniques where you can roughly get where the tumor is to exactly how you exactly what that distance is. Want to send a
So you're asking how you know where the tumor is?
maybe how do you
How is
do
that?
that?
Yeah. So there are different ways how to do that. One is this imaging that I showed you for the prostate cancer patient. Very often we do some positron emission tomography scans or SPECT scans, single photon emission scan, where you inject something that accumulates in the tumor. And then it lights up and then you can measure how where it is. Sometimes you would actually open up the patient. But those are the main things that you do. On a normal X-ray or ultrasound, it's kind of hard to see, although we can see it. So very often it's the first scanning that you do. You can't see it directly because the density isn't different. And then you would kind of do one of these dimensions. And then, especially when you have a treatment over 5 or 6 weeks, tumor shrinks. Right? So you have to do the scan of the treatment as well to keep on top of it. Yeah, beautiful or horrifying examples in the literature where people did the scan. And then the next day, when they come for the treatment, they're very really tight underwear. And all of a sudden, depending where the tumor is, it kind of moves. And this is why it's probably good that we do in North America, we have to scan. Like, I'm personally not a fan of it, but there are very good reasons why.
You had said that at the full-time radiation clinic which you were managing, you guys took 10 patients.
Yeah.
At these bigger like institutions in the United States, for example, how many patients would they accommodate per year?
Thousands.
Okay.
Yes, from a economics perspective, we were viable, but we had a machine already in place. Yeah.
Yes, so there was a graph earlier of proton treatment that are red circles, flush that's gray circles.
Yeah.
I noticed that there's only one data point that has visible error bar.
Yes. So that is the crux with biological experiments. So when we did these experiments, we had the cells in little vials. And then we wanted to make sure we understand everything that's going on. So we did one vial and then we did several vials in case we're positioning it wrong. And then when they then took the vials and put the cells onto the petri dishes, they didn't just do it with one because maybe something goes wrong with one of the petri dishes, they did it with many. So in the end, you are ending up with hundreds of these petri dishes. And then when we did the experiment, we also didn't do it all in one day because we wanted to eliminate if there's something funny with the cyclotron that day. In general, the error bars are really, really good. But there was one where it's an outlier, where something happened that we don't know what it was. But that's why we have done so many experiments. To kind of keep controlling it. Very good spot. Thank you. Yeah.
That's awful vertical or especially we feel that they're.
Yeah. Remember when we talked about the linear energy transfer, the LHT? That example that I showed you was alpha particles. It's they are more lethal because they are heavier than the electrons. So most of the interaction happens with electrons. The proton is about 2,000 times heavier, and alpha particle is 4 times as heavy, so it's even more lethal. And then carbon atoms are even more lethal because they're heavy. Although there's a sweet spot, if you're going too heavy, then it doesn't work anyway. Carbon is sweet spot. Yeah, I just know natural occurring radioactive decays with carbon ions. Like it's that's
It's actually older and like blood consumers, they were hypoxic.
Yeah.
And so actually, this was effective. I was wondering, I guess, since we're getting the free radicals from water, does being hypoxic matter, or is hypoxic just proxy? Less water.
it's basically just a proxy for less water or less blood. And I said that it's especially good for hypoxic tumors, but it's also not, it's never as simple as that. When you do your traditional therapy with photons, and you do it over the course of like 5 to 6 weeks, how you can imagine the tumor treatment is like you're taking away the layers of onion. Like the first day that you do the treatment, the inner part of the tumor is hypoxic, outer part now. The treatment hits there. And then the layer is kind of dying away. And then the next layer will become aerated, not hypoxic. And then the next day you can treat that and so on and so forth. It's just something to do with. Yeah.
I guess what I was asking there is hypoxic, does that mean by oxygen?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just means there is not.
If we use the oxygen, when we create water.
When we use, so the oxygen is in because of the water and the blood that's in our tissue.
Also, they're also.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
How would you compare your cyclotron to CERN?
Completely different technique, also different energy. So we cannot do the really smashing of particles to create completely new particles, concern us. We can only accelerate to about 3/4 of the speed of light, while CERN can go to 99 something percent of the speed of light. I forgot what exactly. Does anyone know? What it was? It doesn't sound that much, but it's worlds of a difference. CERN means that. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just before we go, so we have our next public talk on March 19th. So it will be from Susan, from the Concordia University. And she will be talking about designing the sustainable aircraft of tomorrow. It will be in the same room here on March 19th at 7 p.m. So thank you everyone for coming.
Good for inviting me. That's fun.
Never.